Well, good evening and welcome to Tracking the Tropics. I'm meteorologist Brian Hutton Jr. in Raleigh, North Carolina. And tonight we have two new named storms in the Atlantic, and we will also take you to New Orleans for this.
Hi, I'm Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen at WGNO in New Orleans. We're going to talk about Hurricane Katrina 15 years later and the impacts along the northern Gulf.
So we'll get to all of that here, kind of a look back at Katrina from 15 years ago coming up here in just a second. But first, of course, we are still in the middle of hurricane season. We are quickly approaching the peak, which is September 10th. So we are 9 days away now from the peak of hurricane season. It has been an active year so far. In fact, if we look at our tropical climatology, we are near the top here as we turn the calendar officially to September. And we still have a long way to go. Even though we peak on September 10th, the entire peak season really goes from about August to October, about August 15th to October 20th or so. So we are really just now entering the main peak of hurricane season, and we are going to stay busy, it looks like, as we head through the next couple of weeks. Here's what we are so far. If you haven't been paying attention to the tropics today, two new named storms were added. Nana and Omar, both are currently tropical storms. One could become our next hurricane on the list. And if you see all the names here and underlined with this red line here, which is our C, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, and O named storms. Those are the earliest to form on record. We are outpacing the 2005 hurricane season, which is the most active on record in the Atlantic Basin. And in fact, our N and O named storms forming almost a week ahead of where we were in 2005. So we are still very busy, and we look to stay busy as well. Let's start you off here with Tropical Storm Nana. Again, this formed a little earlier today. Latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Winds were at 50 miles per hour, pressure at 1,002 millibars. This is quickly moving through the Caribbean. It's moving west at 18 miles per hour. It looks like it's starting to organize itself a little better from what we saw a little earlier today. Hurricane hunters got in there, found a well-closed circulation and an eye wall feature that was developing. That kind of got blown apart a little bit, but it looks like thunderstorm activity is starting to realign itself around the center, as it looks like the mid and low level centers were kind of displaced a little bit earlier today. That looks like Nana's trying to remedy that. And so as it moves off to the west, it is forecast to become a hurricane right before it makes landfall, likely in Belize as we head into likely Thursday morning. So it's forecast to really steadily intensify as it approaches land on Thursday and then move over portions of Belize, Guatemala, and heading towards the Mexican plateau, where it will fizzle out as we head into Friday. The main concern with this is going to be rain and mudslide concerns as this moves onshore. There'll be some wind concerns as well, especially on the Belize coastline. But this will not impact the United States. This will stay into Central America, which is really the case since this became an official invest area a couple of days ago, and that forecast looks to hold true as well. The other named storm that we are tracking this evening is Omar, which now this is infrared satellite, so it's not quite as clear of a picture as visible was earlier, but it's kind of disorganized out there. You look where the icon is, the center is actually sitting about here, but notice most of the cloud features are off to the south of the center of circulation. So Omar is struggling just a bit with some wind shear. Latest advisory from Omar at 5 o'clock has winds at 40 miles per hour, pressures at 1,007 millibars, and it's about 225 miles at that point east of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Now, the good news for us, even though this is the closer system to land, this is forecast to head out to sea, and it will kind of take its good old time. It's not moving very fast, or at least by where it is now. It will slow down even just a bit as it heads out into the middle of the open waters of the Atlantic on Thursday and Friday, and then slowly meander back off to the north like as either a tropical depression or an extratropical low. So this will not bring any direct impacts to the United States either. One thing, though, it is causing is an increase in rip currents. Here's a look at the current rip current risk, and you can see areas here in red. This is a high rip current risk for basically the southern Outer Banks, from just south of Nags Head back down towards Atlantic Beach, those who are familiar with the southern Outer Banks, and then a moderate risk of rip currents kind of just on either side of that as well, stretching all the way down towards Oak Island down in southern portions of North Carolina. So while it's not bringing rain, clouds, or wind, it is bringing a rip current risk. That is something that you'll want to keep in mind if you are planning a beach trip perhaps heading into this weekend. The one thing that's going for Nana that won't be helpful for Omar in terms of intensification are water temperatures. You see where where Nana is sitting, not Laura, the other storm we're talking about. There's a buoy just near where the center is with an ocean water temperature of 85 degrees. And normally we want the ocean surface to be about 80 or warmer for hurricane development. 85 is extremely warm, and it's forecast to basically stay over ocean water temperatures about 85, 86, 87 as it heads towards the coastline. That will help intensify it. As far as Omar is concerned, though, it will start moving away from the Gulf Stream, which is that warm current of water that rides right along the eastern seaboard. And as it gets further out into sea, the ocean water gets cooler and cooler. And so that's why Omar really won't be strengthening much. That, and it's caught in the westerlies, and so wind shear will also kind of help tear it apart. But it's nowhere near as warm as what Nana is seeing down into the Caribbean. So that will help kind of keep Omar at a tropical storm at most as we head through the next couple of days. And the same feature that's actually steering Nana into the Central America is actually going to be sending Omar out to sea. There's a big area of high pressure. It's the Bermuda High. You've probably heard that talked about several times so far this hurricane season. It's what helped to steer Marco and Laura as well about a week and a half ago. Let's kind of set up shop right between Bermuda and Puerto Rico, and it stretches almost across the entire about eastern third to two-thirds of the Atlantic. It nudges all the way into the Gulf of Mexico and stretches all the way back out towards another tropical area we'll be watching. And so this on the southern end will steer Nana down into Belize. On the northern end, grabbing Omar will help send it out to sea. So the same feature is steering both of these systems. And that's also why neither one is a threat for land. It's kind of going against the direction that the winds are pushing this system. As I mentioned, there's one other system we're keeping our eyes on. Well, there's really two, but this one here has a very small chance of developing and really is just going to kind of stay put over the next couple of days. This tropical wave will likely overtake it. There's a tropical wave that's just now starting to emerge off the coast of Africa. It has a 50% chance of developing over the next 5 days as it moves south of the Cabo Verde Islands and heads out into the open Atlantic. So we'll keep an eye on it, as it does have a 50% chance of developing. Right now, there has a long way to go between where it is now and any land areas, including in the Lesser Antilles. So it's something for now that we'll keep our eyes on. And again, it has a 50% chance of developing. So as I mentioned, we are heading towards the peak of hurricane season since 2000, so just over the last 20 years, not counting this year. Look at this. August, September, and October combined have over 200 named storms over the last 20 years. As I mentioned, we are just now really getting into the peak of hurricane season, and there's a long way to go. Of course, we'll be here with you through all of it. All right, now, as many of you know, not much of Louisiana made it through Katrina with little or no damage, and areas that did survive became home to people who lost everything in the storm, while other areas were completely decimated. WGNO's Kurt Sprang follows 15 years of progress.
Along St. Tammany's lakefront these days, people bring in the water and take in the view. And the breeze, well, it's a selling point. 15 years ago, Hurricane Katrina's wind and water socked anything close to the lake. In Slidell, it was mostly flood damage. In Mandeville and Covington, more of the damage was caused by falling trees.
That morning, going out into the subdivisions in the areas, trying to get to the areas that you couldn't even get to.
The parish went on lockdown, and people weren't allowed to return from evacuating for more than a week as the roads were cleared and debris removed.
I didn't really want them to see what we were seeing, truthfully. I mean, people were calling in, have you seen my house? And we really didn't want to tell them your house is no longer there, or it's under 8 feet of water.
Kevin Davis was St. Tammany's parish president at the time. He worked to lead the parish's recovery while repairing his own home that flooded. Oh, and he and his wife had a newborn baby to take care of at home as well. Davis wanted to get businesses reopened as quickly as possible so people could rally around their communities as they rebuilt. And rebuild they did, with new higher standards for roofs and windows. Also, new elevation maps required homes closer to the lake to be raised. Along Mandeville's lakefront, any new constructions or repaired homes or businesses were lifted at least 13 feet into the air. Structures that couldn't be saved were removed. So where does St. Tammany stand now? Since 2005, according to the Census Bureau, the parish's population has grown by more than 40,000. FEMA sent nearly $475 million to repair schools, utilities, and other infrastructure. Also, more than $55 million arrived to raise and strengthen homes and other buildings.
Each one of them were pulling their own weight. They were helping people, fire departments, police departments, mayors, council members.
15 years later, Davis is still proud of his team and the people of St. Tammany who worked so hard to rebuild and to make this view what it is today. Kurt Sprang, WGNO News.
All right, joining us now is WGNO Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen from down in New Orleans. Now, Hank, you got to New Orleans a few years after Katrina struck the area, but you were able to see the city transition from devastation to recovery. And we just watched a short story about the rebuild there in St. Tammany Parish. And from your point of view, how has the city transformed 15 years after that historic storm?
I mean, it's really tremendous, Brian. You know, I live in St. Tammany Parish, actually, so the recovery there has been tremendous. I mean, the amount of people that have flowed in to that parish, I think it's the 4th largest in the state at the moment. But, yeah, I got here in 2007. It was an interesting dynamic getting here at that time because there was still so much damage, so much recovery to go from Katrina. I still remember people talking about how, you know, when can we get our FEMA money and, you know, what's the problem? And I remember coming in as an outsider thinking, you know, where is all this money? You know, because you hear about all the donations being made and all the different groups that were donating money at the time. So I got down here. Some of the popular areas like Lakeview and Orleans Parish near the lake were still really damaged. I mean, I could drive around and I would have people come in and visit me when I first moved down here, and I would drive around in those areas because they wanted to see what the damage was like. And there were just so many houses that still had, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, the National Guard, whatever you want to call it, sort of the symbol on the window where they would mark the date that they looked at the house, any survivors or any deaths on the house and that sort of thing, and then an indication of what unit they were. So many of those houses still had that on the boards on the windows from that time, and that was in 2007. And then fast forward to now, I mean, that is one of the booming areas of the parish where it has been rebuilt. People have come in. There's been people from out of town, of course, that have come back in. Unfortunately, some of the people that got displaced from the storm haven't been able to come back, maybe financially or for whatever reason. So there's been a definite blend of people that evacuated coming back, people that just stayed rebuilding, and people from other parts of the country coming in. But you know, it was really an interesting dynamic because, of course, you had the recession nationally in 2008. So 08, 09 was a tough time nationally, and it was interesting to me that you didn't really feel that here because obviously nothing's going to be worse than what this area went through in 2005. So it's really been on a steady climb ever since, before this year, of course, with coronavirus and all that. But, you know, really since 2005, this area has been on just a steady recovery, more population, more tourism, more growth. It's, you know, it's been something to see.
Yeah, you know, in fact, you have the Katrina map there behind you. The last hurricane issuance, when I worked in Mississippi just a couple years ago, in fact, the last hurricane issuance was about 20 miles west of where I was. So, and we had the deep tide to Katrina as well, much later getting in the area than 2 years after. But, you know, I've been in New Orleans since, obviously. In fact, I've been in the lower 9th Ward about 6 years ago now, last time I was in the lower 9th Ward. And when you go to New Orleans, especially in the some parts, you can just tell the area is different from pre-Katrina to now. And as people move back into the city and as, you know, the area continues rebuilding, do you notice a different attitude amongst the people who are now calling New Orleans home?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like you said, it's been a process. It's been a longer process for some people than for others. Of course, the lower 9 was one of those areas really hit hard. I mean, as the storm came in, it was pushing that surge up through St. Bernard Parish into the lower 9 there. And you know, it's an interesting dynamic because there are people that have been here their whole life that will never leave and, of course, have fought their way back and through this. And then there's been an influx of people who have come in and helped to provide the money and provide the necessary boost to rebuild the city. And I think the one thing that is common about everybody is they love New Orleans. They love this area. I mean, I've seen just countless stories since I've been here over the past 13 years of, you know, spring breakers, for instance, coming in on their spring break time to help, you know, just clean up a house here and there, maybe in the lower 9 like you were talking about or somewhere else, and then just liking the atmosphere, falling in love with, you know, just everything that the area has to offer, and then moving back when they graduate from college or, you know, whatever the case may be. So the attitude since, I got to tell you, the attitude since when I got here to now is just so much more positive, so much more lively, so much more upbeat. I mean, there's over 1,000 restaurants in the city now. There's new restaurants opening all the time. Now, we take a step back this year, obviously, a big step back with the whole pandemic situation. But before this, Just such an upbeat mood all the time. I mean, just going from festival to festival, and Mardi Gras has been bigger and bigger every year, pretty much the attendance over the past few years. Jazz Fest has been bigger and bigger. French Quarter Fest, which is free. There's just been so many benchmarks that have continued to be exceeded over the past decade or so, just because, everybody's come back, everybody's wanted to come back, be a part of the rebuild. And, it's hard to think of another time, at least in the past couple of decades. I mean, we've had different catastrophes, obviously, around the country and the world, but just the amount of people that have come in from such a wide range of domestic and international locations wanting to be a part of the rebuild. It's really been something to see, and a positive vibe,
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. Like I said, when I lived in Mississippi, I worked with several people who just loved going to New Orleans. There is just this vibe about New Orleans. There's the brand new airport now too there. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening in New Orleans. And if you haven't been, it is definitely truly unique, a truly unique city. And something that I dealt with when I was in Mississippi, and I'm curious your take since you're in New Orleans. Anytime we had a storm come into the Gulf, they would always ask, is this going to be the next Katrina? Now, obviously, we didn't suffer the devastation you guys did, but do you find that anytime you talk about storm, just with Laura and Marco a couple weeks ago, do you find that people ask that question, is this going to be like Katrina?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you're absolutely right. Look, before Katrina, the benchmark was Betsy. I mean, again, I got here in '07, but from what everybody has told me, just to a person, one after another, before that, Betsy was the benchmark, and everybody would say, well, we made it through Betsy, or, Betsy did this. And you've had other big storms, obviously. Andrew came over here, and certainly many others, but Betsy was the benchmark. And so now Katrina is the benchmark, and the amount of anxiety around here, it's really sad to have to deal with. And you mentioned Mississippi. I mean, let's face it, that landfall came up right along the border. You had 25 to 28 feet of storm surge along the Mississippi coast. I mean, that is almost unheard of. Casinos wiped off their foundation, just everything wiped out. And I think that gets overshadowed by the plight of New Orleans, because Mississippi was actually able to rebuild, I think, relatively well and relatively quickly in relation to New Orleans. But that is definitely the thought in everybody's mind. Everybody tells me that, before Katrina, you just didn't have the anxiety. People were like, well, here comes another storm. We may evacuate, we may not. And now, anytime something, and that's why most of my time actually here during hurricane season is spent just trying to say, all right, well, let's hold on here, because anytime, now, and certainly now there's more social media and there's more internet access and there's just more content out there for everybody to see. So anytime somebody posts a, American model 5-10 days down the road of a massive storm, or you see one of those red areas from the Hurricane Center, it's just the anxiety level increases so much. And that is definitely the benchmark. Everybody wants to know what is the impact going to be as it relates to Katrina. We know the pumps have been built up so much, and the hundreds of millions of dollars to build the city up with the levees and the pump system, but they really haven't been tested to this point. I think that's the one thing that still is in the back of everybody's mind. I mean, we've had a couple of storms. You had, Isaac and Gustav, but they moved along, down the coast here. There really hasn't been a significant storm that came up like Katrina towards the Mississippi-Louisiana border. And I can show the radar here, where you're just getting tremendous storm surge coming in from the east and then wrapping around from the north with that force. I mean, we've had tons of minor storms come through with coastal flooding outside the levee system, as we call it, but there really has not been, since 2005, I mean, it's hard to believe, since that time, there hasn't been a true test to this area and to the structural system. And so, everybody talks about how much money's been spent and all this stuff looks good and they test it, but you really don't know until you get a storm here. So there's tremendous anxiety anytime something starts to come this way, just because you really don't know.
Right, that's a great point. I thought, the levees haven't been tested. It reminds my own hometown of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, right? And after our second flood in '36, we were declared flood-free. They put in flood barrier walls, and then we flooded again in '77. It was like, well, it didn't work. So you're right, there is an anxiety until it gets tested. And I'm sure you, like a lot of people, the later we have to test it, we're not rushing for a storm to come, but, that's right, that anxiety is going to be there. And I'll finish off with this question here. It's been fantastic, by the way. For you, since you arrived after Katrina, do you find the people, especially who were there in Katrina, comparing things to how they were before Katrina, or do people generally look forward to how New Orleans is rebuilding and how that rebuilding continues?
You know, that's a great question, and I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I can still walk up and down the streets around here or into a restaurant or into the newsroom with people that were here. I mean, you can go anywhere, and people will still use the phrase before Katrina. I mean, it is, you know, you can set your watch by it, no matter who you're talking to, no matter what the topic is. People will always say before Katrina, because that just changed so many lives. It changed the way people, I mean, it was life-altering, and there's not too many events, I think, that you go through in life that just will completely change your life as a whole. So that is a common phrase, and certainly people remember. Certainly they use that phrase. It's sort of a turning point in life for them, good or bad. But, you know, a lot of people also say, you know, I'd rather not see the images. I mean, it just brings back bad memories, and, you know, we don't, you know, let's move on, let's move forward. So I think it's a combo. I mean, they always remember it. It's always going to be the before Katrina phrase at the end of the sentence, you know, when I was working here, or my house was this, or I had, you know, this pool put in after Katrina, whatever the case may be. That phrase is so common, it's uttered all the time. There's definitely a looking forward and trying to move forward. And, you know, I think trying to find ways to move the city forward, whether it's, you know, we all know the impact the Saints have had on the city. So whether it's that, or whether it's maybe different festivals, or now you have different, you know, international companies coming in building stuff. They're putting in a Four Seasons downtown at the river. You've had, you know, just other businesses come in and try to expand into the area. So there's definitely a forward thinking. There's a younger set that's filtered in over the past few years as well. It's become a bit of a technology hub in the Deep South here for, you know, some younger folks to come in. So there's definitely a forward movement. And I think, you know, the past is always there, and you're always going to have that shadow, let's say. But, you know, people are always just trying to get away from it as much as possible.
That's definitely understandable. And that parallels a lot here in Raleigh as a big tech hub, so I can definitely relate to that. So let's start on a light note here. You know, if I know I've been in New Orleans, and I think anybody who's probably spent any amount of time somewhere in the South has probably at least been to New Orleans at some point. It's kind of those things you have on the bucket list, right? Go to New Orleans. For those who've never been, what would you tell them about New Orleans today?
Oh, man. I mean, like you said, there's no other place like it. I mean, there really is not. You know, there's a couple other food cities I can think of, you know, maybe like a Charleston. There's some music cities, you know, like Austin, and they got some food out there too. But I don't know if you're ever going to find a place. And look, New Orleans, I mean, it's got plenty of bad spots too. I mean, you know, even before Katrina, there was plenty of bad stuff, and there still is. But it's just, as a whole, I can probably only think of a few cities in the world maybe that would compare. And so you're really not going to get anything like this anywhere in the U.S. I mean, the combination of being able, you know, when life returns to normal, the combination of being able to go get some world-class food, some fantastic cocktails. I mean, even the cocktail renaissance over the past few years, the past couple of, you know, maybe decade or so, this was one of the cities for that. And this whole, you know, fresh movement of farm to table, and, you know, how people eat and how people drink now. This is such a huge part of that. The music scene, obviously, here in the Deep South, and the jazz music and the blues background and the rock and roll background, too. I mean, if you take time to dig into any aspect of what you're interested in, you know, you can probably find a tie-in back to New Orleans somewhere. And so, you know, I would say if anybody's coming down here, everybody wants to do the tourist stuff and everything, and that's fine if you want to do that. But if you really take some time to research and really dig deep into something that you're interested in as it relates to New Orleans, I think you can probably find it, and you know, you can get lost in it. I mean, that's just how much history there is here.
That's very true. And Hurricane Cocktail, too, very famous. That's definitely not for those who are weak.
If you get the right one, don't get the cheap one.
Yeah, that's true. You have to get the right one. You have to know where you're going if you're heading to Bourbon Street. That is very true. Yeah. Great stuff there, Hank. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us and some insight and backstory into Hurricane Katrina and how the city has moved forward. Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for being with us. Again, that's WGNO's Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen down in New Orleans, Louisiana. Fantastic city. Thank you so much. And learned a lot there. Like I said, I've been there a couple of times. It's a great city. You really have to experience for yourself. You've probably heard stories about it, but to see it yourself, it's truly something special. Even post-Katrina, it's still great. So now, as you know, school is in session for a lot of people now across the country, whether it's remote or in person. But 15 years ago in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, all of the schools were wiped out, not due to the pandemic, but to Katrina. Yet they were among the first to restart in-person classes. Here's a story of resilience and a journey back to the classroom.
Well, when Hurricane Katrina hit us on that August 29th of 2005, it was complete devastation. But the people of St. Bernard Parish are extremely resilient, and they wanted to come home, and we wanted to rebuild. And I made the pledge that the first student who would step foot back in St. Bernard Parish, we would provide educational services. So 11 weeks after the storm, on November 14th, 2005, we opened our St. Bernard Unified School, which was the first one open in the metro area, metro New Orleans area. We were in trailers, used generators to produce power because we didn't have electricity. So the conditions were very primitive, but I think the love and the care that we provided to those children and their families was immense, and really was responsible for the rebuilding of St. Bernard Parish. So in actuality, at this point, we've got brand new facilities, 7 brand new elementary schools, 3 renovated middle schools, and then Shellman High School, which really is second to none anywhere in the state of Louisiana and beyond. We consolidated into one major high school where we have over 2,000 students. And it spans what you would consider the grounds of at least 2 separate schools, but it's connected by a climate-controlled walkway across Judge Perez, which is a major thoroughfare in St. Bernard Parish. I think we have left this school system in a very, very good place, and this community in a good place. We have state-of-the-art facilities, but more importantly, we have continued that sense of family that has always been a part of St. Bernard Parish Public Schools.
A fantastic story there, and I think that anytime there's any big natural disaster, I think we always can find those stories of resiliency and that resolve, and we've seen that now out of New Orleans after Katrina, and I think that we'll see many more of those stories to come in the next couple of weeks out of Lake Charles, Louisiana after Hurricane Laura moved through. And anywhere you look, even through this pandemic, we found stories of resiliency and stories of hope and of courage of people trying to come back and getting back to a sense of normalcy. And even though there's still a lot of hurricane season to go, and undoubtedly we may see 1 or 2 more storms at least threaten the U.S., no matter what happens, we are a very resilient people, and I think that that is the one thing that unites all of us, even while we're separated because of this pandemic. Well, I think that's a good spot to end it here tonight. Some great stuff. I want to thank Hank Allen again from WGNO New Orleans for joining us tonight on your weekly trip of trekking the tropics. We'll be right back here next Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. We appreciate you spending part of your night with us. Live in Raleigh, North Carolina, I'm Brian Hutton Jr. Have a great rest of your evening and stay safe.